They are the heirs of Alexander the Great, among them the most famous queen of antiquity. The Ptolemies rule Egypt longer than any other dynasty. It's a last heyday on the Nile and an era of great changes.
The Ptolemaic dynasty transmitted Egypt, ancient Egypt, to the modern European world.
And yet with them, the history of ancient Egypt ends. What's the Ptolemies' formula for success? And why did their empire collapse in the end? In 333 BC, the young ruler of Macedonia, Alexander III, challenges the Persian king Darius. The opponents meet at Issos. The Macedonians are clearly outnumbered. Victory seems impossible. With a daring cavalry charge, Alexander turns the tables on the Persians. He puts their king to flight and defeats his army. If he pursues him now, he has a chance to destroy the enemy once and for all. Yet Alexander decides against it. He wants to move south, to the legendary empire of the pharaohs. Ancient Egypt has existed for more than 2,700 years, with its magnificent buildings, its mysterious religions, and its immeasurable riches. However, the great days of Egypt have long passed. In the 6th century BC, the Persians made Egypt one of their provinces. Like all subject peoples, the Egyptians must pay tribute to the great king, as is shown on the relief in his capital, Persepolis. After his victory over Darius, Alexander wants to end Persian rule in Egypt and win the throne of the pharaohs for himself. The Macedonian king leaves nothing to chance.
Alexander was brilliant. He knew that you didn't just take over a country by force. And he decided, for whatever reason, that he liked Egypt a lot, and he figured out a way to win the hearts and minds of the ancient Egyptians.
Alexander's first journey takes him to the capital, Memphis. There, he sacrifices a live bull to the god Apis in the local sanctuary. Alexander thus deliberately sets himself apart from the Persian rulers, who it is said had killed the Apis bull in Memphis. An ancient author claims that following this outrage, the Persians were hated throughout Egypt.
The
problem is that these texts were written in retrospect, so the victors are portrayed in a most positive light. Especially Alexander the Great, who ended Persian rule over Egypt, is shown as a shining hero, so it's a bit difficult to evaluate the Persian period appropriately.
The Persians don't merely rule, they also bring innovations into the land on the Nile, such as the camel. Until then, donkeys were the main means of transportation. The undemanding animals make it possible to open up entirely new routes through the desert. The Persians also improved the infrastructure of the country. They dig a canal connecting the Nile with the Red Sea. It allows fast and easy travel between Persia and Egypt. Alexander has even bigger plans for the newly won country. During an inspection trip from the Nile to the coast, he recognizes what Egypt is missing: an ocean-going port. And so he founds a city on the Mediterranean coast bearing his name. He chooses the location carefully.
Alexandria was founded by Alexander at a most favorable strategic location, with harbors to the Mediterranean Sea, but also a good connection to the inland via various waterways. And he certainly also founded the city with a view to create a hinge between rich Egypt and the rest of the Mediterranean basin. And Alexandria fulfilled this function just wonderfully in the period that followed.
Alexander plans the city himself. The port is crucial. A causeway to the island of Pharos creates two protected basins, one for the navy, one for the merchant fleet. A canal is built to connect the city on the Mediterranean Sea with the Nile Delta. Soon after founding Alexandria, Alexander sets his sights on a new goal. It's a decision that remains a source of speculation to this day. From Alexandria, he sets out on a journey with his closest companions. The men cover almost 600 kilometers. Their destination is a legendary place, the oasis of Siwa in the middle of the Libyan desert. The oasis lies far from trade and travel routes, on the edge of the then known world. In spite of that, Siwa is famous. It's one of the three most prestigious oracle sites of the ancient world.
Oracle sites played an important role in classical antiquity. It was common to go there and ask for advice before making important decisions. And that's exactly what Alexander the Great did at Siwa.
Oracles have a long tradition in Egypt. During the Old Kingdom, rulers consult the vulture goddess Nekbet. During the New Kingdom, an oracle saying of Amen legitimizes the rule of Queen Hatshepsut. The common people asked the gods for advice during a bark procession. Ramses I and his namesake successors turned to the god Ptah. The Ptolemies adopt the tradition and turn to the legendary Imhotep. Like a hidden garden, the oracle site of Siwa lies in the middle of an impassable wasteland. It's the westernmost point of the Egyptian Empire. On the Siwa plateau stands a temple built by the pharaohs in the 6th century BC. Yet archaeological finds suggest that the site is much older. The temple is dedicated to Amen, the highest deity of the Egyptians. What exactly happens during Alexander's visit to Siwa remains a mystery to this day, since officially no one is present when he visits the oracle. One source relates that Alexander asked the god Amen if he was his father. As in the Temple of Siwa, Amen is represented throughout Egypt as a ram, the symbol of strength and fertility. The Greeks later adopt the ram's horns of Amen as an attribute of their supreme god Zeus. And so, Zeus Ammon emerges, the oracle god with ram's horns. Yet, why is Alexander II depicted on coins with the ram's horns? When he leaves the oracle, a priest is already waiting for him, greeting him as son, saying that Amen had instructed him to use this form of address. Alexander is supposed to have said that he had heard what he had wanted to hear. On his trip to Siwa, the Egyptian priests thus attested to the Macedonians' divine lineage. At least, that's how the sources relate it. So how much political calculation was behind Alexander's trip to the oracle?
His going to the oracle of Ammon might have been a whim, but it probably was a whim rooted in political strategy and intelligence. So when he went there and he was hailed as a god king, I'm sure he probably knew that that was going to happen. And this was, in fact, the easiest and the most straightforward way of becoming king in Egypt and making the Egyptians have a sense of loyalty towards him.
In Siwa, Alexander achieves two goals. He has a godlike position confirmed for him, and he secures a pharaonic throne. Presumably, Alexander also wants to gain control over new trade routes, since with the introduction of the camel, Siwa may have become an important stop on the way through the desert. After his return from the oasis, Alexander reorganizes Egypt's internal structure. He appoints Macedonian generals as commanders of the army. Egyptians will now solely serve in administrative positions, and he secures himself the support of the priesthood. The new pharaoh sees to it that the religious elites regain their offices and privileges, just as before the Persian period. This is also evident in the old temple complexes. Some are lavishly restored thanks to the financial support of Alexander. In return, he's depicted as an Egyptian pharaoh on several temple reliefs. In March 331 BC, Alexander leaves Egypt after less than 4 months. However, his short stay will change the country forever. Yet Alexander too is no longer the same. As a divine ruler, he conquers half the world. Until he dies in Babylon, just 32 years old. The pharaoh from Macedonia never saw Egypt again. The death of Alexander shakes the world. The empire of the Macedonian king extends over parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Yet no one is able to follow in his footsteps. His empire breaks up. Alexander's generals divide it among themselves. For a long time, they had fought side by side. Now Alexander's former companions are at odds over his vast inheritance. They go down in history as the successors, or diadochi in ancient Greek. One of them is Ptolemy. The childhood friend of Alexander has made it to the rank of general and became one of the 7 personal bodyguards of the king. Now he wants to rule himself.
Ptolemy I, the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty, had been able to secure Egypt for himself relatively early. An excellent choice, as it turned out, since Egypt was economically prosperous and could be defended comparatively well.
From here, Ptolemy plans his next steps. In 321 BC, he pulls off a coup. He seizes Alexander's body, which one of the other diadochi wanted to take to Greece. Ptolemy has it brought to Egypt, to its capital, Memphis. It's a tremendous gain in prestige, since whoever possesses the corpse can present himself as the legitimate successor of Alexander. Yet Ptolemy thus ignores the express wish of his dead friend. Alexander wanted to be buried in the oasis of Siwa, the place where he had learned of his divine descent. At Siwa, there's an important necropolis from the late Egyptian period. A huge complex with thousands of tombs carved into the mountain of the dead. The cemetery is used until the Roman era. Some believe Alexander is buried here. Alas, his tomb has never been found. It's probably only a legend that the Macedonian was buried here. He probably found his final resting place in Alexandria. Soon after the seizure of the body, Alexander's successors wage bloody campaigns against each other. They go down in history as the Wars of the Diadochi. The Egyptian empire benefits from its natural borders. An invading army from the Levant suffers heavy losses in the northeastern Nile Delta while trying to cross the river. Its soldiers fall victim to hungry crocodiles and wild hippos. Ptolemy triumphs. In 304 BC, he declares himself king of Egypt. As ruler and founder of a new dynasty, Ptolemy wants to make a clear statement. He launches several major building projects in newly founded Alexandria. The new Egyptian metropolis on the Mediterranean is intended to herald the power and durability of the Ptolemaic dynasty. One building stands out: the lighthouse. With a statue of the sea god Poseidon, it becomes the landmark of the city and will be counted among the 7 wonders of the world. Yet the lighthouse, or pharos, isn't merely an object of prestige. Its fire also serves as a beacon guiding ships to the great seaport of Alexandria.
It may even have burned 24/7, as fire causes smoke, and smoke too can be seen from afar. And the higher it rises into the sky, just think of the Native Americans with their smoke signs, the better the tower could serve as a beacon.
The lighthouse is said to have been up to 160 meters high, higher than the Great Giza Pyramid. Construction took about 20 years and was not completed until after the death of Ptolemy I. The tower is emblazoned by Egyptian sculptures. At the base, there are 12-meter-high stone figures representing Egyptian mythology. Where there was once a lighthouse, now rises a 15th-century fortress. Back then, the Mameluke rulers used the ruins of Ptolemy's Pharos for its construction. To this day, it guards the port of Alexandria. Almost all traces of the ancient city have disappeared. Layer after layer, Alexandria has been built over. It's now Egypt's second largest city, urban, cosmopolitan, with a colourfully mixed population. A legacy of antiquity.
Alexandria was also very cosmopolitan. You had Egyptians, you had Greeks, you had people from all over the Near East, Libya, and all throughout the Mediterranean and African world, converging in this place. So it was a place for traders, for politicians, for people of learning, and also lots and lots of religions. So it was a real cocktail, and it was a sort of a powerhouse for ideas of all sorts.
Alexandria becomes a melting pot. It's the port of call for ships from all over the eastern Mediterranean looking to trade with wealthy Egypt. It's a new experience for the empire of the pharaohs. People from various regions of Europe flock to the country and find a new home in Alexandria. The ancient metropolis shows a distinct Greek influence, yet also Jews, Thracians, and other ethnic groups settle in Egyptian Alexandria. In the southeastern part of the city, the Ptolemies build a temple, the Serapeum. Here they worship Serapis, a hybrid deity that combines Greek and Egyptian characteristics.
Creating new gods is typical of Egypt. You can always create a new god, since everything around you is divine and so can be redefined, an idea that is highly unusual outside Egypt.
The remains of the Serapeum can still be seen in Alexandria today, a final testament to the heyday that began with Ptolemy I. When the ruler dies in 285 BC, at the age of over 80, he leaves behind an empire that's economically, politically, and militarily stable. His son, Ptolemy II, continues his father's policy, posing as a Hellenistic king, yet at the same time taking care to be a good pharaoh for the people and to involve the Egyptian elites. The country on the Nile benefits from this open policy. In 278 BC, the new ruler marries. His bride bears the name of Arsinoe. What's special, Arsinoe is a sister of Ptolemy. As Philadelphos, the sister-loving one, the ruler can refer to both Greek and Egyptian models.
The Ptolemies justify sibling marriage by two traditions. The Greek tradition, as the god Zeus has married his sister Hera, and that in ancient Egypt there were cases of sibling marriage in the pharaonic royal family. For the Ptolemies, this will be their trademark. They use this as a way of keeping the power.
From now on, they stage themselves as a divine couple. A contemporary poet jests, "He thrust a sting into an unholy hole," lines for which he pays with his life. Arsinoe is one of the Egyptian queens who is deified even during her lifetime. She's highly influential at court and heavily involved in Egyptian politics. Arsinoe establishes the tradition of strong Ptolemaic women. Her images have immortalized a special trait of the dynasty.
The Ptolemies are characterized by the fact that they all have very large eyes. This may have been a stylistic feature to emphasize the eyes as an image of the soul. But there are also interpretations that suggest that the Ptolemies actually had a genetic defect, which may have intensified from generation to generation, similar to the Habsburg lip.
The medical term for the pathological protrusion of the eyeballs is exophthalmos. On the Nile island of Philae, on the southern border of Egypt, Ptolemy erects a magnificent temple for Arsinoe, a legitimization of the new family policy carved in stone. On reliefs of the temple, Arsinoe is depicted as Isis. In Egyptian mythology, the goddess marries her brother, Osiris. A clear message from the new ruler to his people. As a warlord, Ptolemy II fulfills all expectations. The fleet protects the coasts of the empire. The Egyptian Macedonian army wages its campaigns far beyond the borders, against the Seleucid Empire and other rivals. Under the Ptolemies, an overseas empire emerges with numerous bases in the eastern Mediterranean, in the Levant, on Cyprus, in Asia Minor. Long-distance trade brings new prosperity. And the Ptolemies renewed the strategic traffic route connecting the Red Sea with the Nile Delta, a forerunner of the Suez Canal. The waterway built by the Persians had silted up over time. Now it's repaired with the help of a complex system of locks. It's a stroke of genius by Ptolemy's engineers.
The Ptolemies revitalized the old Suez Canal that connected the Red Sea to the eastern Nile Delta. They secured the sea routes on the Red Sea by creating an entire series of cities. And in the 2nd century BC, they succeeded in establishing a direct sea route to India.
Ancient sources relate that Ptolemy sends an envoy to the empire of the Indian emperor Ashoka. Contacts with the subcontinent had existed since the time of Alexander. In return, Ashoka sends monks to Egypt to lecture on the teachings of Buddha, a dialogue of religions across continents. The Ptolemies also developed the Egyptian hinterland. The Fayum Basin south of the Nile Delta is considered the vegetable garden of Egypt, after the pharaohs had had the swamps drained. Now the Ptolemies settled their army veterans here. Greek engineers succeed in tripling the area under cultivation. Thanks largely to new techniques that greatly improve the millennia-old methods of irrigation. One of the most important inventions is the water wheel, called Noria in the Orient. it can carry water upwards, so that it can then be channeled through canals to areas previously dry, creating new arable land. The oldest known water-powered balers date from the Ptolemaic era. Innovations such as the Archimedean screw and the pressure pump of Ctesibios are intended to improve irrigation of the fields. Yet apart from technical inventions, the Ptolemies also bring a new food culture to Egypt. One of the traditional crops is emmer, an ancient specimen of grain Egyptians used to make bread and beer. Under the Ptolemies, the Egyptian diet expands.
Greeks and Macedonians had their specific ways of life. They cooked with olive oil, they liked to drink wine, and to eat products made from wheat and barley. Products that were not grown on a large scale in Egypt before. Now the new settlers from Greece and Macedonia bring ever more of these products to Egypt.
About 40 new settlements emerge in the Fayum basin. The largest is Karanis. The desert has reclaimed vast areas of it. Yet 2,000 years ago, there were flourishing gardens here and vibrant life. The famous mummy portraits of Fayum, pictures of the deceased painted on their sarcophagi. They date from Roman times, yet the deceased were descendants of Macedonian settlers. In the arid climate of Egypt, the portraits with strikingly individual features have survived exceptionally well. The rich yields of the Fayum Basin provide not only food for the population, but also high tax revenues. It's thanks to this abundant income that gigantic building projects such as those in Alexandria become possible in the first place. The wealth of the Ptolemies is legendary. The dynasty is supported by a Greek-Egyptian upper class that gets well paid for its loyalty. Among the few archaeological traces from antiquity that can be found in Alexandria today are the catacombs of Kom al-Shukafa. In Roman times, they served as the final resting place of wealthy citizens. To this day, the catacombs bear witness to the crossover between Egyptian and Greco-Roman culture.
Alexandria was hugely important as a melting point. I mean, you literally see the melding together in some of the necropolis, some of the tombs. You know, Anubis wearing, Roman armor. I mean, it is literally a melding of the ancient Greek and the ancient Egyptian traditions.
In Alexandria, something new is emerging from different ancient cultures. The knowledge of the world is to be gathered in the legendary library. As a consequence, Alexandria replaces Athens as the intellectual hub of its time. Although the library was celebrated in antiquity, it's still unclear how it was destroyed. Perhaps by a severe seaquake that shakes the Mediterranean Sea in 365 AD, when a devastating tsunami hits the coast of Egypt. The palace district of Alexandria, where the library is located, is destroyed by the tidal wave. So it's likely that the ruins of the library are now at the bottom of the sea. An unexpected boon for archaeology. Since the 1990s, divers have been searching the waters off the coast for the sunken remains of the city. Over the years, they've recovered numerous finds from around Alexandria. Alas, there is no trace of the library. It must have been a building complex of impressive size. Before its destruction, the library gathers as many as 700,000 scrolls under its roof. All works are written down on papyrus, most of them in Greek, some in Hebrew or in Egyptian. The writings cover the known fields of knowledge of the time: mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and the natural sciences, with an emphasis on astronomy. Science is a passion of Ptolemy II. Alexandria's scribes produced the world's first library catalogue to keep track of the vast material, which is supposed to grow continuously, even by resorting to tricks.
The Ptolemies were quite obsessed by their magnificent library, and in fact they were very clever about getting books. Of course, they sent people out to buy them, but if any ship came into the harbour, they had it thoroughly searched, and they took away all the scrolls, and they had them copied, and then they gave the copies back to the people and kept the originals, so they always had the first edition.
In Alexandria, Jewish scholars translate the Torah into Greek for the first time, laying the foundation for the Old Testament. An Egyptian priest, Manetho, writes a history of the Egyptian royal dynasties from their beginnings. It has remained the reference point for any chronicler of ancient Egypt to this day.
The work of Manetho is lost. However, we know excerpts by later historians. These excerpts were the basic source for early Egyptology. Even today, Egyptologists use the dynastic scheme introduced by Manetho.
His division of 30 dynasties over a period of almost 3,000 years remains a key guide to Egyptian history. Although much of his information is disputed today, his work remains invaluable. Commissioned by the Ptolemies, the historian emphasizes the age of the Egyptian Empire. His counting of dynasties ends with the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great. Yet Alexandria is not just about books and theoretical knowledge. Attached to the library is the Museum. Here, the scholars of the time conduct research. For instance, the physician Herophilos, who is considered the father of anatomy. He's said to have performed the first scientific autopsies on human bodies in Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. For the first time, the circumference of the Earth is calculated correctly by Eratosthenes, establishing geography as a scientific discipline. Euclid writes the most important book on mathematics in Alexandria and proves the theorem of Pythagoras. The mechanism of the water clock is refined here. As for research, Alexandria keeps its pioneering status for centuries. In the 2nd century AD, the scholar Claudius Ptolemy conceives the geocentric view of the universe. Alexandria may be a multi-ethnic city, yet there are limits to cultural exchange.
Alexandria is one of the big centers of Hellenism, a think pool in the truest sense of the word, where things are rethought. So actually something very exciting. However, this Hellenistic tradition of thought didn't incorporate the Egyptian tradition of thinking.
The coexistence of cultural and intellectual traditions is shown by a world-famous find from the Ptolemaic era, the multilingual stone of Rosetta. In 1799, a soldier in the army of Napoleon in Egypt happens to make a chance find. Some 20 years later, it provides the crucial clue for deciphering hieroglyphics. The trilingual inscription makes it possible to decipher the hieroglyphs, which, like the letters of the alphabet, stand for sounds. The first hieroglyphs that can be deciphered add up to a name: Ptolemy. The inscription from 196 BC pays homage to the dynasty. Yet at this time, the decline of the Ptolemies has already begun. Their empire is on the defensive. The Egyptian army suffers defeat after defeat against its arch-enemy, the Seleucid dynasty in Syria. Yet Egypt succeeds in preserving its sovereignty. However, with increasing pressure from all around, the Ptolemies gradually lose their overseas possessions. That they're still able to assert themselves as a major power is due to a new player on the political stage: Rome. During the 3rd century BC, Rome ascends to the first rank of Mediterranean powers, eliminating rival after rival. After losing 2 wars, Carthage's role as an eminent power ends in 201 BC. Rome is now the leading political power in the Western Mediterranean and turns its gaze to the east. The seemingly unstoppable rise of Rome yields an unexpected advantage for Egypt and the hard-pressed dynasty of the Ptolemies.
By expanding into the eastern Mediterranean, the Romans stabilized Ptolemaic rule, as Rome's wars until the middle of the 2nd century BC were usually fought against potential enemies of the Ptolemies. This way, the Romans played into the hands of the Ptolemies.
Ptolemy VIII rules Egypt from the mid-2nd century BC. Alas, he has an image problem. As is tradition with the Ptolemies, the VIII likes to flaunt the wealth of his dynasty. Yet while the pharaoh presents himself as the successor of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, he has scholars and intellectuals expelled from Alexandria. They take revenge in their own way. They revile Ptolemy VIII not just as a pleasure-seeking drunkard, but also as a tyrant and a cruel ruler who cares little for the welfare of his subjects.
Many Ptolemies acquired positive, well-sounding bynames. Ptolemy VIII called himself Euergetes, the benefactor. However, this was turned into the opposite by the Alexandrians, who called him Kakagetes, the malefactor, or simply Physcon, the fat one.
The 8th Ptolemy becomes infamous for a cruel family drama. He marries his sister, rapes his niece, marries her, banishes his sister, then is himself driven out of Alexandria by his ex and takes brutal revenge.
They have a child together, Memphites. Ptolemy, who was in Cyprus at the time, succeeds in luring him over to the island and kills him, cuts him up, and sends the package to his sister in Alexandria as a birthday present.
Horror stories like this are of little help in stabilizing the rule of the Ptolemies. Therefore, good relations with Rome are all the more important. The influence of the Romans in Egypt is steadily growing. However, the Senate is still reluctant to annex Egypt. The wealth of the country on the Nile could lead to internal strife in Rome and destabilize political order. Relations with Alexandria, however, remain close. In 134 BC, Ptolemy VIII receives a Roman delegation in his capital. It becomes a true clash of civilizations. While Ptolemy proudly presents the splendor and luxury of his empire, the ascetic military leaders of Rome see it merely as a sign of decadence and moral decay. Egypt's future seems uncertain. All the more so since the Nile floods repeatedly fail to materialize. According to Egyptian belief, it's a sign that the pharaoh doesn't find favor with the gods.
There are some promising approaches that try to link climate phenomena with economic developments, but also with domestic political developments in Ptolemaic Egypt. Since the Ptolemies, like all Egyptian kings before them, were held responsible for the proper rise of the Nile, this could very quickly create domestic problems for any ruler.
To climate researchers, Greenland is an important place. Here they can take samples from the kilometre-thick ice sheet. The ice cores are a kind of climate archive. They document long-term developments, but also natural disasters to the year. In 2020, researchers make a surprising discovery in a layer of ash. They find out that in 43 BC, during the final phase of the Ptolemaic Empire, there was a huge volcanic eruption on an island off Alaska. The enormous cloud of ash causes global climate change. In East Africa, the summer monsoon shifts south. As a result, the Nile River carries too little water. There are crop failures and famines, a well-known phenomenon in the history of Egypt. The unification of the empire takes place in 3000 BC during a period of drought. The end of the Old Kingdom also coincides with the drought period. A drought accompanies the third intermediate period, as well as the invasion of the Persians in the 6th century. For Egypt's rulers, each of these crises is fatal.
So the people faced a problem which the pharaoh could not solve. In such cases, the system did no longer function properly, and distrust of the ruling house set in.
A distrust that triggers revolts. These are crises that she, too, has to deal with. Cleopatra. The Ptolemaic dynasty ends with her. Yet, unlike her immediate predecessors, she tries everything to avert the downfall of the Egyptian empire.
Cleopatra VII was an extraordinary ruler for the Ptolemies because she seemed to have been interested in Egypt, had a sense of responsibility, was one of the few Ptolemies in the later part of the dynasty to have actually travelled through the country. She seems to have known Egyptian, the language, not just spoken in Greek. So she had a real appreciation and care for her country, which was not the norm for the Ptolemies.
Cleopatra's reputation remains shrouded in legend to this day. Was she really a classical beauty, as this bust of her suggests?
We don't know what Cleopatra looked like. There are written sources and there are visual ones. I would argue that none really reflect reality. What probably comes closest to her appearance are the coins. According to that, her appearance was striking but not particularly attractive.
In her profiles on most of the coins, an expressive nose and a determined face stands out. Ancient sources emphasize Cleopatra's intelligence, her grace, and her resourcefulness. For example, she's said to have smuggled herself into Caesar's palace, hidden in the carpet. Cleopatra asked the Roman for help in the throne dispute with her brother, a risky gamble with the most powerful man in the world at the time.
She's contending with this colossal giant, an empire now that dwarfs even that of Egypt at its greatest extent, Rome. I mean, Rome was so powerful. And I think maybe Cleopatra, I would like to think, was doing her best to navigate Egypt around and with this gigantic power of Rome.
At the time of Cleopatra and Caesar's first meeting, Rome has long been the undisputed leader of the Mediterranean world. Caesar himself has pushed Rome's boundaries even further. So far, Egypt has been able to maintain its independence. Yet the future of the Pharaonic Empire is already inextricably linked to the fate of the Roman Empire. In Alexandria, Cleopatra and Caesar forge an alliance that benefits both. Thanks to Caesar's intervention, Cleopatra becomes the sole ruler of Egypt. Caesar, for his part, gets a reliable partner who secures him the wealth of Egypt, above all, the grain supplies for Rome. When Cleopatra becomes pregnant by Caesar, the alliance seems sealed.
Her political methods were certainly unconventional, and that includes her relationship with Caesar. She had a child with him, so there must have been a kind of personal relationship. However, there certainly were bigger issues at stake. It's obvious that behind this partnership, there were some definite political intentions on both sides.
Yet Cleopatra's plans fall apart when Caesar is assassinated in Rome in 44 BC. The queen must now protect herself and her son, the heir to the throne, and prevent falling victim to internal Roman politics. At the Temple of Dendera, there's a huge relief on its southern outer wall. It shows Cleopatra as the pharaoh with her son Ptolemy XV, also known as Caesarion. As her designated successor, he wears the double crown of Egypt, while Cleopatra sacrifices to the gods. A decree from 33 BC bears the signature of Cleopatra. Under it is written in Greek, "Genosthoi, so it shall be." It's the only known handwritten record of an ancient Egyptian ruler. Cleopatra is determined to secure her power, and thus the continuation of the Egyptian empire. The realm of the eternal gods and godlike pharaohs, with a proud past of 3,000 years. As for the complicated relationship with Rome, Cleopatra makes the most of it. After Caesar's death, she manages to win over Rome's new strongman, Mark Antony. In Alexandria, she gives the Roman general a triumphant reception. Both appear side by side for all to see. Antony even has coins struck carrying their double portrait. In Rome, Cleopatra is labelled the whore of the Nile, which is quite to the liking of one man, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son. He was once an ally of Mark Antony, now they're deadly rivals. Octavian declares war on Egypt. In 31 BC, the forces clash. In the naval Battle of Actium, the Egyptian fleet suffers a catastrophic defeat. At the last moment, Cleopatra escapes with a handful of ships and flees to Alexandria. The pharaohess knows that all is lost. Like her lover, Mark Antony, she sees only one way out: suicide. That she kills herself by the bite of a snake probably belongs to the realm of legend. Yet most researchers agree that she resorted to some sort of poison. With Cleopatra's suicide, the history of ancient Egypt as a sovereign state ends.
Cleopatra VII gambled with high stakes and lost. Actually, no ruler at that time would have been able to stand in front of the Roman supremacy. Pharaonic Egypt had outlived its time, and its structures were no more able to continue.
In 1996, divers find ruins that may belong to Cleopatra's palace in the harbour of Alexandria. But does ancient Egypt ultimately perish with Cleopatra?
With the death of Cleopatra VII, Ptolemaic rule ends, but that does not mean the end of pharaonic Egypt. Since the Roman emperors, who subsequently integrated Egypt into the Roman Empire, also have themselves portrayed as pharaohs in Egypt, and they continue the building projects the Ptolemies had initiated.
He's the first to step into Cleopatra's shoes. Octavian, the first Roman emperor and pharaoh, later called Augustus the Exalted. He makes Egypt his personal province. Due to its abundant grain resources, the land on the Nile is an important backstop to his power. All future emperors will do likewise. Thanks to the fusion of Greek and Egyptian culture, the Ptolemaic dynasty leads Egypt into a final period of glory. When this balance breaks, their era comes to an end. Yet Egypt continues to fascinate us to this day.